Welcome back, everybody, to our studies in AQA A-Level Politics. This lesson is going to be focusing on the next of our electoral systems. This system being, of course, the single transferable vote. Now, the single transferable vote is a proportional representation voting system. It's used for a number of specific elections in the United Kingdom, specifically local council elections, as well as elections to the Northern Ireland Assembly. And prior to Brexit in the United Kingdom, it was also used for European Parliament elections. Now, the aim of the single transferable vote is to ensure that the proportion of seats that are won by candidates closely matches, insofar as possible, the proportion of votes that are received by different political parties or groups, and that it allows for voters to express a more nuanced preference for multiple candidates. This lesson specifically then is going to focus on how the STV voting system works, think about some of the key elements and key features associated with it, before using some examples to try and illustrate the point, and then finally thinking about the advantages and the disadvantages of this electoral system. So in asking this first question then, how does STV actually work? How does the single transferable vote work? Well, the first thing that should be noted is that unlike first past the post, which operates in single member constituencies, STV is used in multi-member constituencies. This means that each constituency elects more than one representative. This is often ranging from 3 to 6, depending on the specific election that we are talking about. So, for example, in a constituency electing 5 members, that means that there is therefore 5 seats that need to be filled. Voters will therefore rank candidates in order of preference. They can rank as many candidates as they like, from their first choice to their last. If a voter prefers only one candidate, they can just vote for that one candidate, rank only one candidate. If they want to express preference for the other candidates, then they have the ability to do so. Now, in that particular selection of candidates, then, their first preference is the candidate that the voter wishes to see elected. The second preference will be their backup candidate, and this would be if their first choice candidate does not succeed in being elected. Finally, then, you have subsequent preferences. This is where they can continue to rank candidates in order of preference. Again, this is definitely optional. Now, in order to be elected, a candidate must reach a number of votes. This is a threshold of votes, sometimes known as a quota. The quota is calculated using a formula that is known as the Droop quota. This is a formula that tries to, insofar as possible, ensure that the result is proportional. Now, the Droop quota looks a little bit like this. Now, for those of you who aren't mathematicians and who probably finished GCSE maths and decided that they were never going to do maths ever again, this isn't as difficult as you might think. You're not going to be asked in an exam paper to calculate a number of votes in and accordance with the Droop quota. It's just important that you understand how it works for you to have a better understanding of and an analysis of the STV system. So the Droop quota tells us that the votes needed to win a particular seat is equal to the number of valid ballot papers, so the number of people who have cast a vote, if you will, okay, number of votes, divided by the number of seats plus 1. And then all of that is also plus 1. The Droop quota essentially ensures that the total number of votes needed to elect a candidate is sufficiently high to prevent any candidate from winning with a minority of the vote. So that's essentially what this is telling us is taking place. So, for example, in a constituency that is electing 5 members, the quota would be set so that the candidate needs just enough votes to be elected, while also leaving enough room for the other candidates to complete to compete for the remaining seats. So let's walk through an example of a STV voting system, and we'll do so with a 5-member constituency to illustrate how this process takes place. So, we have 8 candidates, candidate A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. This is a 5-member constituency, and so the first step that is important to note is the initial voting. Voters in a constituency will then rank their candidates in order of preference. So, supposing we have these 8 candidates, and each of the voters rank their preferences, we might get a result a little bit like this. Let's say that candidate A gets 1,200 votes, candidate B 800 votes, candidate C 650, D 550, E 400, F 300, G 250, and then finally H 100. If the quota for the election of a particular candidate is 1,000 votes, this would be based on the number of voters and the number of seats to be filled, then candidate A would immediately be elected because they have 1,200 votes. They have reached this quota. Their excess votes, that extra 200, the votes that are in excess of the quota, are then transferred to the votes of the second preferences. And so when a candidate reaches a quota, the quota in question, any surplus votes will have to be redistributed. The votes of the voters who selected that candidate as their first preference choice are transferred to their second candidate choice, their second choice for a candidate. What this does is it ensures that no vote goes to waste and that the elected candidate's support is spread to other voters' preferences. So, for example, if the quota is 1,000 votes to reach that threshold, and candidate A has won 1,200 votes, then that extra surplus of 200 votes will be transferred to the voter's second preference. Now, obviously, it should be noted that in these elections, of course, it is not just we're not dealing with hundreds and thousands of votes. Or 1,000 votes here or 100 votes here. You're often dealing with thousands of votes, maybe even sometimes tens of thousands of votes. After a transferal of the surplus votes from the elected candidates, if there are still seats that are remaining, then the candidate with the fewest votes will be eliminated. In this case, once candidate A has been selected because they have reached that 1,000 vote quota, then they have already been taken out of the race. But then the candidate with the lowest number of votes will also be eliminated. In this case, that would be candidate H that had only 100 votes. They would be eliminated first, and their votes would also be transferred to the voters' second choice candidates. Rinse and repeat this process, transferring the votes and eliminating the least popular candidates until all the seats in that particular constituency has been filled. In this case, you would have 5 seats filled because this is a 5-seat constituency in the example. In each round of counting, eliminated candidates' votes are transferred and the candidates are either elected or eliminated until that final seat has been filled. So for example, after several rounds of going back and forth and rinsing and repeat, eventually let's say candidate B reaches the quota. They then go to the second round. Or candidate C is eliminated and their votes go to the next preferences. And then that means that candidate D reaches their quota following the end of the round. So on, rinse and repeat until all 5 seats are filled. So that's how the system works. But what are its advantages? Well, the first is that it does in fact create a highly proportional system. With an STV voting system, the number of seats a party or a group wins is more closely aligned with the percentage of the vote that they receive. This will therefore reduce the kind of distortion that we see when we think about first past the post, where a party can win a very large number of seats, but only with a very small minority of the vote. It also allows for voters to express quite a significant amount of wide range of preferences. they can rank multiple candidates, which is unlike the supplementary vote system in which you only rank 2. It also allows voters to vote for their preferred candidate without fear of wasting their vote, and it ensures that their preferences are considered if their first choice candidate is eliminated. It leads, in addition to this, to an increase in voter satisfaction. Because voters are able to rank candidates in order of their preference, they are more likely to have their votes transferred to a candidate that they like. This, in turn, leads to a higher satisfaction within the electorate and within the election outcome. Voters don't feel disenfranchised unlike where they would be under first past the post, where voters where votes for losing candidates don't count towards anything. It also leads to a fairer representation of smaller marginalized parties. It tends to give minor parties a better chance of winning seats than less proportional systems such as first past the post. Now, in STV, parties with concentrated support in certain areas will win seats based on the preferences of voters in those areas. The penultimate advantage is that it encourages positive campaigning, a little bit like SV, in the sense that candidates who rely on preferences of voters from outside their core supporters would therefore be incentivized to run more positive campaigns that broaden their electoral base. They need to appeal to a wider electorate to ensure that they can gain second and third preferences from voters who might have initially supported other candidates, but might still support them in their second or third preference vote. And then finally, from the voter perspective, this system can avoid and potentially even eliminate tactical voting entirely. Voters, because they can express their preferences for multiple candidates, are less needing to use tactical voting systems. Voters can express their genuine preferences without thinking that their preferences might be wasting their vote on a candidate that has no chance of winning, because they have other preferences that might also contribute to a second or maybe third preference voter, to actually, or candidate, should I say, to actually be able to be elected. So those are the advantages. What are the disadvantages? And one disadvantage that you might already instantly come across is the fact that it is complex. STV is a more complicated to understand than a system than that of first past the post. It's also difficult to administer compared to first past the post. The process, for example, of ranking candidates and the subsequent transfer of votes, and also the fact that you have to use a mathematical equation, such as the Droop quota, to actually calculate what is necessary to reach a particular threshold, can all be quite daunting for voters and also be quite confusing and time-consuming to count and to actually get an election outcome relatively quickly. This ties into the second disadvantage. The counting process in STV is far more complex than that of first past the post, and even that of the single transferable vote. Even that of the supplementary vote. STV is the single transferable vote. It involves multiple rounds of transferring votes and eliminating candidates, making it slower and making it more resource intensive to conduct an election, especially an election on a much broader scale, as if we were to, for example, use it for the general elections in the United Kingdom. This complexity can lead to delays in announcing results, which can be frustrating for voters and for media outlets alike, and it can also give rise to election fraud, election interference claims, regardless of whether or not those claims have any basis or merit in reality. An example of complicated counting processes and elections taking a long time, giving space to election denialism, can be seen with the 2020 election of President Biden in response, ousting, should I say, the incumbent Donald Trump, because of the complexities surrounding the COVID pandemic and the complexities surrounding the electoral counting of mail-in ballots. You saw that there was ample space and room for election denialism, regardless of whether or not any of those claims were actually possible or corroborated. And so complicated counting processes can be quite daunting and can be quite difficult for people to feel like the risk is necessary to implement. Even though STV is much different to systems like first past the post, strategic voting can still be possible, because while it reduces the need for tactical voting, it doesn't entirely eliminate the need for tactical voting. Voters may still make strategic choices about who to rank as their second and third preferences in order to reach an outcome that is influenced in favour of their preferred candidate or their preferred party. Penultimately, then, this can lead also to fragmentation. In constituencies where there are many candidates, the process of elimination and the transfer of votes may result in a system which is a fragmented outcome. This is where you have elected candidates representing a wide range of parties or a wide range of groups with a wide range of ideological disparities. It can sometimes lead to coalitions or decisions that may not even, in the end, reflect the broader, more mainstream preferences of the electorate. So despite being more proportional, it might actually disenfranchise the preferences or the ideas of the mainstream electorate over these wide range of political decisions and coalitions. And then finally, you see that there will be the overrepresentation of smaller groups. This has a two-pronged disadvantage. Firstly, in some cases, STV leading to an overrepresentation of smaller group can be distorting of the overall representation and the overall popularity of that group, giving smaller parties more influence than the actual level of support that they have nationwide. This, of course, ties into a point that I made in the previous lesson, which concerns the fact that where you have an overrepresentation of smaller groups, that means that you necessarily will have an overrepresentation or a higher than average representation of extremist groups. Extremist groups are often smaller groups, and so one of the advantages of underrepresenting smaller groups in other electoral systems is that you are essentially barring extremist parties from gaining any kind of significant political power. The opposite problem is true in the STV case, in the sense that overrepresentation can lead to more extremist parties taking over and having more significant control. So, just to conclude this video then, STV is a proportional preferential voting system. It allows voters to rank candidates in a multi-member constituency. It is highly regarded for providing more proportional outcomes and also giving voters more choice on who they want as their candidate. However, in the disadvantages side, its complexity and resource-intensive counting process are notable challenges. And so, again, just like with all of the other electoral systems, there are advantages on the one hand and there are disadvantages on the other, and it really depends on what you think is the most important element of each of these different systems for which one you would prefer. In the next lesson, we will do a final video on electoral systems, focusing on the AMS system, the additional member vote system, the hybrid electoral system, which is used in some parts of the United Kingdom.